June 28, 1914. A single bullet fired in a city most of Europe couldn't find on a map. But this wasn't the cause of World War I. It was just the final spark. If it was not, then what was the real cause? For decades, the great powers had been building a doomsday machine. A deadly web of secret treaties, arrogant empires, and military war plans that once started, no one knew how to stop. This is the story of how that machine was built, triggered, and how the modern world was forged in its fire. Welcome to the Rise and Relic. We're often taught World War I began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But to understand why that single bullet triggered a global catastrophe, you need to see what was already waiting to explode. Historians talk about four pillars that held up a powder keg: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. By 1914, the major powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France and Britain, were locked in tense rivalry. Industrial might, vast empires and mass conscript armies created unprecedented power and paranoia. Their war plans weren't just strategies, they were rigid railroad timetables. Once set in motion, pulling the brakes was almost impossible. The stage was set. All it needed was a crisis. So let's look at each part of the machine. Then we'll watch the dominoes fall. First, militarism. Militarism meant more than loving uniforms. It meant governments worshipped military solutions. Germany built a massive fleet to challenge British seas, fueling a naval arms race that terrified London. Britain launched the Dreadnought in 1906, revolutionizing naval power. Germany answered, fueling a naval arms race that stoked British alarm. Budgets soared. Prestige became tied to the size of your guns. On land, everyone believed in a quick victory, but only if you mobilized faster than your enemy. Mobilization became a clock you couldn't rewind. To delay meant disaster. France banked on élan vital, the idea that pure fighting spirit would overcome anything. Whole societies celebrated the army. Newspapers sold glory, but few imagined the stalemate to come. And industry churned out arsenals. The longer peace lasted, the deadlier war would be. Next, the tripwires, alliances. By 1914, Europe was split into two armed camps. On one side, France and Russia had solid pact. Britain was the less formal friend. Opposite them, Germany stood firmly with Austria and Hungary. Italy was the shaky partner, full of secret doubts. Germany backed Austria-Hungary. Italy hedged, its commitments conditional. These weren't just promises, they were tripwires. Belgium's neutrality, for example, was guaranteed by treaty. Violate it, and Britain was almost certain to act. The problem? In a crisis, these alliances reduced flexibility. Leaders assumed allies would prevent war. Instead, they created a false sense of security, making brinkmanship easier. And when a crisis unfolded over days, not weeks, confusion in telegrams could be fatal. Imperialism drove a global grab for land and resources from Africa to Asia. Clashes in Morocco and elsewhere weren't just colonial spats. They were dress rehearsals, testing alliances. Meanwhile, nationalism burned like a fever in the Balkans, a region nicknamed the powder keg of Europe. Secret societies like the Black Hand, plotted for a united Slavic state, and Austria-Hungary saw this as a direct threat to its fragile empire. Russia then stepped in as the big brother of the Slavs, raising stakes against Austria even higher. A dangerous myth took hold, that the next war would be short, glorious and decisive. But technology, machine guns, heavy artillery favoured defence. Military culture still favoured the heroic charge. Each small crisis, like the Balkan Wars, tightened the spring a little more. By July 1914, the Doomsday Machine was primed. The fuse was short. This was the machine. Now for the spark. Austria-Hungary, blaming Serbia for the Archduke's death, sent a brutal, deliberately unacceptable ultimatum. Russia, protector of the Slavs, began to mobilize its massive army. Germany, tied to Austria, saw this as an act of war. It declared war on Russia, and, following its plan to avoid a two-front war, on France. To reach France quickly, German troops invaded through neutral Belgium. That violation of treaty brought the British Empire into the war. In just over a month, a political murder in the Balkans had set the entire machine in motion. The Great War had begun. The enthusiasm of August 1914 would soon vanish in the mud of the trenches, and because these were global empires, the war immediately spread across continents. The war to end all wars was underway. But its true cost and consequences were beyond anyone's imagination. The world goes to war. What began with a shot in Sarajevo reshaped the planet. Four ancient empires, the German, Russian, Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian, collapsed. A generation was lost, and its bitter peace, the Treaty of Versailles, would, but that is a story for another time. If you want to understand what happened next, the nightmare of trench warfare, the new horrors of technology, and how this war truly created our modern world, then make sure you're subscribed to Rise and Relic and ring that notification bell. Let us know in the comments, which empire's collapse do you find most significant? Thanks for watching. Explore the past. Understand the present.